Another bombshell breaking in the Mueller probe is, yes, there are tapes, and Mueller has them. He's listening to Roger Stone's conference calls from 2016, where he's heard saying he was, at the time, in touch with Julian Assange from WikiLeaks and revealing plans about those hacked emails before the election. The Wall Street Journal's Shelby Holliday broke this story. She's about to join me. Here, though, first is Roger Stone on that conference call, August 4th, 2016.
In the background of this entire race going forward, the fact that that Julian Assange, who say anything he wanted, he's not a fool, is going to continue to drop information on the American voters that are going to roil this race. He's made that very clear.
That same day, Stone sent former Trump advisor Sam Nunberg an email that stated, I, quote, dined with my new pal Julian Assange last night. Stone later said that was just a joke. But it was 70 days after that that he tweeted to the world, quote, trust me, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel. Now we know Mueller focused on Stone's links to WikiLeaks and interviewing people about the calls. They were actually promoted online as a call with the political insider there. Stone has denied advance knowledge of hacked emails.
Let me be very clear. I had no advance knowledge of the source, content, or the exact disclosure timing of the WikiLeaks disclosures regarding the DNC. I received nothing, including allegedly hacked emails from WikiLeaks or Julian Assange or the Russians or anyone else.
Question is, if he was making all these claims in public and on these conference calls, was any of it going back to the people running the Trump campaign? Well, I have news on that as well. Bob Mueller's team questioning Steve Bannon about these very claims that Stone made privately about WikiLeaks. That's also new tonight, a busy time. Shelby Holliday, who broke the story, put this in context for us.
So we know that we're reporting today that Robert Mueller has subpoenaed people and records affiliated with these conference calls that Roger Stone held. They were started in August, and they were promoted as bi-weekly conference calls with the man in the arena. You showed that graphic. And on them, he would talk about his relationship and friendship with Paul Manafort. He'd talk about the inner workings of the Trump campaign. He was an insider in that he had connections to the Trump campaign, and so he talked about them on the calls. He also talked a lot about WikiLeaks' plans to release emails, and he used the quote, roil this race. And a witness in the probe, Jason Sullivan, who helped him organize those conference calls, said he claimed contact with Julian Assange.
Is the idea that him claiming it privately, more operationally, feels more real than what could be dismissed as public boasting?
That's possible, but it could also just be Mueller scrutinizing the number of times Roger Stone claimed contact with Assange. As you played, Roger now says he never had contact with Assange. But beginning in early August, he talked a lot about being in touch with Assange, having a foreshadowing of the materials Assange would release. He went on Alex Jones's show and said he knew what was coming, but he couldn't say too much. And so now it appears that Mueller is looking at every single statement and scrutinizing what he said publicly or privately. And
you're being very careful, as you often are, meticulous about it. And yet David Corn, who's all over the story and also with me, there's another way to look at what Shelby's saying, because if someone just lies a lot, whoever they may be, investigators find, oh, they lied 5 times or 10, that's not altogether more interesting the 10th time. If, though, there's a different context, if they're interviewing Bannon about this because who's already been in for several days, because they actually think some of these weren't lies, wouldn't that be worse potentially for Stone and anyone who worked with him?
Well, I guess if you can get people testifying to private communications, particularly people who are in a position of trust with Roger Stone, then that may have more weight than him just saying what he says on Alex Jones's show or in these conferences in which he's trying to, basically separate people from their money. I mean, Roger Stone's defense at this moment in time is that I am the world's biggest liar. I publicly said again and again and again that I was in touch with Julian Assange. I knew what he was doing.
Be honest, David. Do you find that a potentially credible defense?
Unfortunately, for some people, with Roger Stone, it is credible because
was that a yes?
Is because he.
David Corn, was that a yes?
Yes, it is a yes, because he is known for lying and being a provocateur and saying whatever he thinks is necessary to say at that moment in time, particularly as a self-promoter. But at the same time he was doing all this, he was also in touch with Guccifer 2.0, that Russian internet persona that we now know was a Russian intelligence front. And in public, he was saying the Russians are not involved with this at all. And he's writing a story for Breitbart and going on, defending the Russians and amplifying Russian misinformation. So there's a lot not just on the WikiLeaks side, but on the Russian side, for Roger to account for.
What do you think of Bannon being hauled in?
It's really interesting because, as we've been reporting at the Journal, Mueller continues to bring Stone associates in front of the grand jury and in front of Mueller's prosecutors. We know that some of his associates are still talking to Mueller. We know that they are scrutinizing every comment Roger Stone made in that time. And so Steve Bannon coming in is significant, not just because we know they're focused on Roger Stone, but because he was actually running Trump's campaign. And that's the big question here. Was there collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia vis-a-vis WikiLeaks?
And David, before I let you go, your final thought on this bizarre effort that's clearly of interest in Washington to try to frame Bob Mueller.
You know, I think we still need to figure this out. It could be that our original letter was some sort of hoax to hook in reporters to report something that wasn't true. But your guest just coming on and saying she too was approached, and there's this surefire outfit that really seems to be a bogus intelligence gathering outfit run by people who are completely unprofessional. There's a lot more here. It reminds me of the Peter Smith effort. Remember that during the campaign?
Which Rachel's covered a lot.
To try to get those Hillary Clinton emails from Russian hackers. There are all these players out there. We see them in every scandal, and I'm hoping that the FBI can get to the bottom of this. But you know what? If the Democrats get the House back, this is just one more thing for them to investigate, because we may never hear what the FBI finds out about this particular subject.
And that's where subpoena power figures in. David and Shelby, thank you so much. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.